Hi guys, welcome back. So, I know it's been a while since I've done a recording or anything like that. Just life's been insane, work's been insane, and so this week we are going to be tackling a very controversial topic, which is history's place in public schools. So, as many of you know, I got my history degree back in the late 2010s, early 2000s. I have a master's in history. I don't technically have specialization. My major field is in European religious history, and my minor field is the American Revolution and early Republic period through a somewhat religious tone. I also hold a minor in philosophy and an emphasis in economics. So, why is history such a struggle in public schools? Why isn't there really a set curriculum? So, a lot of that does date back to Reconstruction. So, the Civil War, I'm just going to say flat out, it was about slavery, but emphasis on the fact that Lincoln himself was anti-slavery but wasn't quite an emancipationist. His main viewpoint was coming from the idea of limiting the growth of slavery. He his path towards emancipationist took a little while, was kind of influenced by Frederick Douglass, and like much of the nation as the Civil War went on, the idea of emancipation is being tied towards ending the Civil War really stuck home to a lot of people, especially as news reports of what life was like for people who were enslaved in the South was like, and especially as it bec- it came to light how much of the war really was wrapped up in people's fear that emancipation would create a Haitian style slave revolt. So when the war ended and there wasn't a Haitian slave revolt or any of the reprisals of an enslaved class against their former captors, many Southerners tried to rewrite their history as the lost cause myth. The idea that it was about states' rights, which doesn't really work when you consider we still have the the original secession papers, all of which within the first 10 points states the war was about slavery. And we have journals that highlight the fact that most people on the ground was aware this war was about slavery. They were aware that in many rights they were protecting a social order even if they weren't part of the upper class. So, how does this affect how history is taught? Well, in the southern states, a lot of the early history books were written by the Daughters of the Confederation, rich socialite women who were very much a descendant of the slave owning class. Alongside that, most people, even most emancipationists were either in the mindset of a gradual or really were only willing to go as far as freeing freeing the enslaved class. As far as the North was concerned, as soon as the enslaved class was free, no one really was sure what Reconstruction would be like. And this fight over what Reconstruction is about really does set the tone for a lot of how we understand American history, because how one people view Reconstruction often says a lot about how history is taught. If you're a lost causer, more than likely you still believe the Civil War was about states' rights. You are willing to concede slavery played a part, but the idea that the whole conflict was about slavery doesn't really cross your mind. If if you're part of a progressive school, you view Reconstruction and the Civil War through a economics lens where you're willing to acknowledge slavery played a big part of the Civil War, but you view it more as like how much Reconstruction was economics. If you're part of a consensus or revisionist school, you know the Civil War was completely about slavery, but you view it through the lens of the civil rights movements. If you're a post revisionist, you see, for the most part, you're still in the revisionist school where you see everything Reconstruction, the Civil War being about slavery, but you add a lot more of the different social studies fields to your analysis, and you try to take bits and pieces of previous schools that can be verified through social studies evidence. So, how does this play a part in why history is hard to teach in public schools? So, the main issue is the United States does not have a set history curriculum on the national level. There has been periods and attempts in the past to do that. But the reason why nothing goes very far is even in the even if we exclude the fact that a lot of the Southern lost cause myth is alive, even if we exclude that, as far as like most history books in the United States are concerned, we are still in the consensus period. What does the consensus period mean? It means we still are use a tone or wording in our history books that is very much early Cold War, with the idea that the creation of the United States, everyone was on the same page. And that there is the idea that we were one nation under God, indivisible. That we were all on the same page about what we needed from each other to be one nation. And unfortunately, a lot of the tone of history books that most schools work with or have the budget for still use that tone in the in telling the American Revolution. So So, and right now we are in the neo left or post revisionist period in most colleges and most academic writings, which is we're using pieces of, we're using an economic viewpoint or a Marxist school viewpoint where we look at economic social studies and kind of just accepting that there really wasn't a consensus. Like the actual fight for ratification was extremely messy and it honestly probably would make a really good political drama. But the idea that no one really was on the same page on what the Constitution was going to be, that ratification, especially amongst the founding generation, was a, as bare of a fight as it actually was, doesn't fit a consensus narrative. So, for us to really create a national curriculum of history, we need to kind of accept that a lot of the myths we tell ourselves about how our nation was formed does need to go away, or kind of accept that it's nothing is as glorious as we want to make them out to be. Or alongside that, kind of admitting that a lot of the issues in our public school programs, especially with history, it also has to do with budget, how we view the humanities, how we don't really have the time to have a hard discussion of what did the American Revolution look like? What was the American Civil War? What was Reconstruction? And that's not saying we should be serious 100% of the time. Like, we can have cool moments, like, talk about the amazing work of Ida B. Wells in exposing lynching in the South, Ida Tarbell for exposing the business practices of Standard Oil. Honestly, honestly, having a laugh at things like the Australian Emu War, or having that moment of like, oh my goodness, it's Wojciech, the Polish soldier bear of World War II. That is not to say we can't have moments where we can be cheerful or like be like, oh my god, this actually happened. But that would involve like restructuring how we think history should be taught. Should we teach it with a narrative like most college level courses do once you get past your intro stages? Should we admit that as much as it's easier to go with the great man myth, like how it fits the current way we handle schools in the United States? Or should we just admit that no matter how we really structure public schools right now, things do get left behind? Like, there just isn't enough time. And I am not offering a solution, I'm just trying to explain kind of what the disconnect is between how history is taught academically in colleges versus the current public school standard. And alongside that, history is evolving. How we do historiography, how we do methodology, how our methods and research patterns change over time. Academic history is not set in stone because it very much is much where a bunch of blind mice or blind people feeling an elephant, where one person holding the trunk thinks it's a snake, or looking at a tail and seeing the parts but not the whole, because what motivates one person can be different from what motivates another, and also admitting that no matter how disconnected we are from our history, we do have a bias. For instance, how I look at history is very much from a socioeconomic viewpoint, because religion affects society, and for me, with an emphasis in economics, trade and money does affect how one person sees the world. So, what do we go from here? And the answer is I we don't know. And all this is to start a discussion. Have a good rest of your day.